For a lot of us, when we talk about the ego, we talk about someone who's like cocky, someone who's really overconfident, showing off a lot, and we say someone who's really stubborn, right? And we say, oh, their ego is way too strong. But the ego, believe it or not, is actually just this really powerful protector that lives inside of us. So right now you're thinking, protector, what this doesn't make any sense. How is an ego my protector? So when you were a kid, when you were way back, as a little wee one, with your parents, you would have felt like, and you would have strongly desired affection, connection, validation from your parents, right? Rightfully, as any child really knows. So when a child is really born, they don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex or a forebrain. And so most of their processing happens more emotionally rather than logically, right? Of course. So a child can't say what's right and wrong, good and bad, whatever else, but they know what they feel. So a child at that point is dependent on the parent for those affection, validation, connection, etc. Now, in that space, what happens if a child doesn't get it? You and I as an adult, if I don't give it to you or someone else doesn't give it to you, you step into maybe a mechanism, a coping mechanism, a survival program, but this child is entrusted with this parent. What happens if this child doesn't get it? This child has to create its own coping mechanism. It has to create its own ability to be able to survive that emotional neglect, that parent not being around, maybe that parent being abusive, maybe a family environment that's really toxic. This child has to be able to survive that space so that it can grow. And so the beauty of how we've been created is there's a really strong element within us, within our psyche, called the ego, which then steps in to be the protector. And so what they do at that point is they develop a mechanism which allows the child, so in a weird way, the ego is trying to protect the child's innocence by being the villain, so to speak, but the villainous protector. So it's trying to step into creating these coping mechanisms so that it can either gain more affection, it can learn to survive, it can keep away threats, it can defend itself. And so the ego from that place onwards starts to develop when we're such little, like tiny ones, because that's when we first need to understand how to survive. Now from that state, because we have such a developed brain as we go along, the ego starts to pick up little tips and tricks on how to survive. Now, you may need to survive differently if you were born and raised in, let's say, Thailand, than if you were born and raised in Denmark, because of the cultural differences that are also there. So the ego there also learns how to adapt and survive differently. But the important thing to recognize is that the ego's prime job is survival.